I'm not a handyman. In fact, very few people will consider me a handyman, but it's not necessarily because I don't have the skills, it's because I don't have the right tools. And I've never taken the time to really invest in the right tools and learn how to use them, that I would consider myself a great handyman. These videos are tools, and they're tools for you to learn how to do things a little bit differently, to create positive emotions, to convert negative emotions into positive emotions, to create optimism and help you be happier. But let's face it, a lot of our negative emotions come from the people around us, from the relationships that we have. And all too often, the tools that we have been using to try and fix ourselves and to try and fix others just don't work. And we end up having a lot more negative emotions than we would like to from the relationships in our lives. These tools that we have learned, think of them as your internal scripts, that when something negative happens to you, what is your default response? How do you react when you're offended? How do you react when someone doesn't treat you the way that they should? How do you react when life just goes sour? Those internal scripts that we have, or in other words, the tools that we have learned to use, sometimes get us in trouble and create more negative emotions. But those scripts, those tools have been learned, and you can unlearn them and put in place the skills of optimism and the skills of happiness that I have been covering in these videos. One of the tools that I would like to share with you today is called emotional generosity. Now, emotional generosity is the quality of being kind, welcoming, and understanding to the people around you, even with all of their flaws, their mistakes, their quirks, and their imperfections, without being judgmental. In other words, it means that you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're going to cut them some slack. Now, when I talk about this, I think it's important to say it does not mean you're going to let them off the hook. Because when you give someone the benefit of the doubt, when you cut someone some slack, they are still accountable. What this means is that you're going to be emotionally generous. You are going to help create positive emotions so that the relationship changes, so that you can feel at peace in the relationship, even though someone still needs to be accountable for what they have done or what they need to do. It really is this quality of being kind, welcoming, and understanding of everyone around you. Now, that does not mean that you're going to let people walk all over you. That does not mean that you're going to allow yourself to be disrespected or abused. This is about how you feel and taking ownership for your own feelings, your own reaction, and not that of another person. And when I talk about giving someone the benefit of the doubt and cutting them some slack, I'm also talking about you. I want you to cut yourself some slack. I want you to be not so hard on yourself. I want you to realize that you can be emotionally generous with yourself. Now, the reason I call this emotional generosity, because it is about giving of who you are, not just of what you have. There's a lot of generosity in this world. I'm always impressed at people who donate money, goods, clothing, and other things to people in need. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you giving of yourself so that you can feel more at peace. And I'd like to talk to you about how you can become emotionally generous doing these 4 things. The first thing I'd like you to do is to prioritize blessing the lives of others. Here's what I'd like you to consider. That every morning when you wake up, I would like you to ask yourself, whose life can I bless today? It's a magical question, because just by asking yourself that question, you will encounter someone whose life you can bless on that very day. Now, I am not talking about some major miracle, some huge thing that you're going to do for someone, even though you could, and that would be nice. What I'm talking about is how you would bless their life in a small, simple way. It could be a kind gesture. It could be just being courteous. It could be withholding a snide remark. It could be smiling. Let me tell you something that happened to me not that long ago. I was at the doctor's and I was having my annual blood checkup in wanting to find out whether my cancer had come back, and I was pretty nervous about it. I was afraid to go to the doctor. Every year when I go to the doctor to have a post-cancer checkup, I'm a little nervous. I'm a little anxious about that. And as I was leaving the doctor's office, I was sitting in my car, very nervous and very anxious, and I was looking out into traffic. And what happened in front of me changed how I really felt. There was a lot of traffic, and right in front of me, a woman in a minivan stopped, and I could tell that she had a lot of kids in the back seat, and she was happy. She was singing. She was smiling. And just by seeing her smile, it made a difference in my life. She didn't know it, but she was being emotionally generous to me. She was blessing my life. There are people all around you who you can bless by a simple smile, a kind gesture, just doing something nice. And the beauty is that it not only impacts their life and creates positive emotion for them, it creates positive emotions for you. Your life changes. You start to feel happier because you are helping other people create positive emotions as well. The next thing that I would like you to do is to learn to see people in their innocence instead of their guilt. Now, this happens to us all the time where someone may have made a mistake, where someone, let's say that someone sends you an email that kind of puts you down or causes you to be angry, and you think that they did it on purpose. There are so many times in our life when we think that people are trying to hurt us on purpose. I would like you to consider them in their innocence instead of their guilt. I want you to think about maybe they did not intend for it to hurt you. Now you could say, well, I'm still hurt whether they intended it or not. Well, that's true. But being emotionally generous, you're going to allow those negative emotions to leave you by considering that they're innocent. They're not guilty. And when you start to see people differently, when you start to see people in their innocence instead of their guilt, it makes a huge difference. It was unfortunate that I grew up with a stepmother who really didn't care for me. It was a constant barrage of put-downs and ridicule. And I really started to believe that I was not good. I really started to believe that I was the kind of person that she was telling me that I was. And yet, something happened within me, and I was able to see her in her innocence instead of her guilt. And when I started to realize that she really didn't have it in for me, that really in her heart she probably wanted me to be the best person that I could be, I didn't have to buy into it, and I was able to see her differently, and it didn't bother me anymore. She could have said I was the worst person in the world, and I was able to see her in her innocence instead of her guilt, and it made all the difference. I no longer had to buy into it. I didn't have to listen to it. Yes, I was cutting her some slack. Yes, I was giving her the benefit of the doubt, but it benefited me more than it benefited her. Another way to do this, particularly with people that you have some contention with and that you argue with on a regular basis, whoever that is, whether it's a boss, whether it's a child, whether it's a spouse, an ex-spouse, whoever it is, I want you to be willing to consider that they might be right. Imagine that you're having a conversation or an argument where it's always he said, she said, you did this, no I didn't, yes I did, no I didn't. And you say this, I'm willing to consider that you might be right. Well, what happens is that all of the negative emotion can leave and you can focus in on what's really happening. And until you get to that point, you're not going to be able to resolve anything. When you say, I'm willing to consider that you might be right, you're cutting them some slack. You're giving them the benefit of the doubt. And you're opening up the conversation to a resolution rather than just arguing about it. The other thing that I would like you to try is this. I would like you to cut yourself some slack. Who says that you have to be your own worst critic? You don't. You can be your biggest fan, and no one is going to hold it against you. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be boastful. It doesn't mean that you're going to be prideful. What it is I just want you to accept that you make mistakes. Cut yourself some slack. If you're going to be emotionally generous with other people, I want you to be emotionally generous with yourself. Emotional generosity really opens the door for positive emotions, particularly when there are so many negative emotions that happens in the relationships that we have. And regardless if that relationship is with someone you really like, or you should like, or someone you dislike, by giving them the benefit of the doubt, cutting them some slack, being kind, welcoming, and understanding, even in their imperfections, it's going to make a difference in your life. You will reduce the negative emotions that sometimes come through those relationships and convert those negative emotions into positive emotions. Emotional generosity is a key to being an optimist. It is a key to being happy, even when you may have relationships that in the past have been very negative. Try this out. Try blessing the lives of other people. Try seeing people in their innocence instead of their guilt. Try being willing to see that other people might be right. Be willing to consider that they might be right, and then cut yourself some slack. It's going to make a huge difference in your life. And the difference is that you will be happier.